I can never seem to find the right partner. If only I found somebody who understood me and loved me for who I was, things would be better. I go from one shitty job to another, and I can never find anything that's fulfilling. It is so depressing. I have goals, I have dreams, but my condition keeps getting in the way. I don't know how anybody's supposed to get ahead with such a corrupt government. Every time I try and get ahead, something pulls me back down. When is it gonna end? Welcome to another episode of Hug Me, I'm Insane. My name is Perry Johnson. So I don't know if you've ever found yourself saying anything resembling what I was alluding to in the intro. I know that I certainly have. Whenever I found myself feeling like I have no power, or that I can't get ahead, or that life is depressingly oppressive in some manner or another, my brain, whose job it is to seek safety for me, invariably and inevitably starts pointing the fingers at what or who to blame as a way of creating an obstacle for me to overcome, as a way of creating some way of me stepping back into my power. Because when I'm ranting and raving and taking action against a great oppressor of some description or another, it makes me feel better about my situation. I operate under the illusion that I somehow have more control over my life and this sordid, depressing situation that I find myself in, or constantly find myself in, or often find myself in. And I've had many, many bad guys in my life. Many bad guys. As I alluded to in the intro, I've pointed the finger at partners, unloving relationships, friends who I thought were my friends but somehow ended up betraying me or doing me wrong in some way, dead-end jobs, asshole bosses, government oppression, a messed up childhood, screwed up parents, abusive teachers, bullies, aliens, meteors, you name it. If I could point the finger and externalize my pain and anguish, I would do it. And I just want to point out right here that I'm not saying that bad things never happened to me and that I was never hurt by people. Obviously, I've encountered many, many people in my life who have, out of their innocence or ignorance, hurt me or traumatized me in some way. And many of those experiences resulted in belief systems which, to this day, I will buy into and yet don't necessarily serve me. It's almost as if no time has passed. And this is what they call trauma. And I think it's important to understand the definition of trauma as I see it, which is any event in which our brain cannot adequately process, and so we fragment. And that can be anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be some dismemberment that happens in front of you or something like that, those sort of events that we traditionally view as traumatizing. It can be any experience in which we're not able to process, we're not able to understand. And this is why a lot of trauma happens in childhood, because we haven't yet developed an understanding of human nature and the separation of self from others, particularly those in a position of power, like some kind of a parental figure, for example. And so as a result, some of those traumatic experiences when we're children lead us to the conclusion that the problem is us. And this is a very childlike conclusion to draw from many traumatizing experiences. And this is why Aristotle said, "Show me the first 7 years of the child and I will show you the man." Those early experiences have a profound effect on how we view ourselves and therefore how we view the world, how we experience the world. It's through those lenses that formed in early childhood, and many of those belief systems are operating at an almost subconscious level. And this is very common and happens to varying degrees with varying people to varying effect. The challenge is in us understanding and seeing how those belief systems allow us to, or don't allow us to, interpret the world. And it's in that distortion or those distortions that we can come to the conclusion that we don't have much power or any power, and believe at that very base level that we're not going to be okay. And here's the reason why. It's the partner, it's the government, it's the job, it's the this, it's the that. And I'm not saying that those things aren't detrimental to our well-being. We very well may be in a dysfunctional, unloving, even abusive relationship or job. We may find ourselves much of the time in life situations which are extremely challenging and threaten our well-being on multiple levels. Here's the part to understand about all of that. We create that. We attract that. We have a subconscious belief that that is what we deserve. On some level, we understand that we want more, we want better. Intellectually, we know that we want to level up. But those very old belief systems, which are operating subconsciously in a lot of cases, continue to defeat us. And those of us that have had some experience with therapy and with going in and looking at those early formative years and examining many of the belief systems as a way of questioning their veracity and their validity, those of us that have done that work will come to the understanding that, in fact, I can start telling a different story about myself, and therefore how I fit into the world and what I attract into the world. And that comes by way of what I expect of the world, by way of what I expect of myself. It all comes back to the self. Everything comes back to the self. All roads lead back to the self. I say that all the time. It's in understanding that in any given situation, I have considerably more power than I probably tell myself I do. And once we can tweak into that paradigm of becoming objective around the stories and the belief systems which our brain is telling us, once we're able to practice inserting that interrupt in those places where we're getting pushed into uncomfortability or unmanageability or violence or upheaval or depression or high anxiety or something like that. There are tools and methodologies that we can learn that challenge the messaging that our brain is giving us, because our nervous system is always going to respond to the impetus from our brain. And it all comes down to how we're interpreting what's going on. What I think is happening is only true because I believe it to be true. So I like to give the example of the two people walking down the beach. I've used this example before, but I think that it's valid. And one person is enjoying the sand and the sunset and the breeze and the water lapping and the sand in the toes and all of that. And the other person is crying and racked with grief and very, very upset. And so how could that possibly be? You're walking down a beautiful sunset beach. Well, if you were somebody that watched a loved one or a pet or something drown in the ocean, then visiting a beach and walking down the beach is going to be very traumatizing for you, because that stuff gets held in our body at a somatic level. And it also informs us on, it informs us on multiple levels. And if we don't properly process that grief, then we hang on to it and we continue projecting it onto our present circumstances. And that experience and that mechanism is a flag. It's waving at us saying, heal me, heal me. But the trick is to become objective about, again, our process. If we don't become objective about that process and begin to connect the dots for what is actually happening, then it's impossible for us to heal that stuff. in order for that to happen, we have to take some action. And a lot of the times that action can be uncomfortable in the sense that it requires us to go in and flip-flop around in the mucky muck of those traumatizing experiences, to relive them. I know that for myself, I've utilized a few different healing methodologies, including somatic therapy and EMDR and CBT, which I probably use the most. CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is more or less the practice of what it is that I've been describing, in which we question the experience that we're having. We learn to question the messaging from our brain. But sometimes in order to be able to get to that objective place, we have to do other work first. And that might involve somatic therapy. That might involve some other kind of therapy. People arrive at these places in different ways, and everybody has their own path. And there's no one way of learning to do these things. But I found that for myself, it's taken multiple tools in my toolkit in order to be able to address this stuff. But one thing that I know without any hesitation, and it is the topic of this episode, is that continuing to externalize and point the finger at things outside of myself as being the problem, with a capital P, that thing that keeps holding me down, whatever it is that I keep saying is creating unhappiness in my life, as long as I am pointing outside of myself, I'm not in the solution. And again, I want to be really clear that that's not to say that the things that I've experienced are invalid or wrong, or that they weren't difficult experiences. And I'm not suggesting that other people haven't had a role in my life in terms of the experiences that I've had, whether they be positive or negative experiences. What I'm saying is that all of those things come down to my interpretation of those events, how I frame the things that happen in my life, not just in my past, but in the day-to-day and the moment-to-moment. And I always come back to that quote from Matt Kahn, who says, "Everything is here to serve you." And once I adopted that, took it on board as sort of a personal day-to-day mantra, things really simplified for me. My life got much less arduous and much less difficult because I realized that experiences that I was having were wholly dependent on my brain's interpretation of those experiences and the conclusions that it was drawing. And this points to one of the most important challenges that we have in modern society, and that is the absence of a spiritual connection, some type of belief that we are all connected in some way, and that most importantly, that energy that connects all of us, of which we are all a part, wants us to be successful and feel fulfilled and feel like we have purpose and that we belong and that we're loved. But it's us that get in the way of that, not anything outside of us. It's us that gets in the way of that. Specifically, those belief systems and those stories that we continue to tell about ourselves and therefore about the world. I think that if you were able to run a little experiment where you carry a little notebook with you or make a note on your phone or something like that of every time you said something negative to yourself during your day. And by negative, I mean like you drop a pen, like, oh, way to go. Even something as seemingly innocent as that. Oh, nice one. You know, like you bump into somebody and you think to yourself, oh, nice one, Perry. That's a bash. That's a small little beating up on the self. And for some of us, that inner voice can become pretty vicious. You spend a few days writing down, making notes about how often that happens. You begin to see a picture. It becomes pretty clear how prevalent that negative self-talk mechanism is alive and well. And more importantly, continues holding us back because it seeks to keep us down, to keep us at level or below level of everybody else. Don't rock the boat. Don't stick out. Keep in line. But the divine doesn't want you to keep in line. The divine wants you to stand up and make your voice heard. The challenge that many of us have ahead of us is to find that voice. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.